These are the best global strategies. I'm glad you like it and enjoy watching. Warhammer 40,000 Dawn of War Dark Crusade. This game was included in the list of global strategies for two reasons. Firstly, I am a long-time and devoted fan of the universe of the dark distant future, where there is only war and a little laughter of the dark gods. Secondly, unlike its predecessors in the series, the plot of Dark Crusade is very specific. Some may say that it does not exist at all, but I believe that it refers players to the tabletop founder of the series. Before us is Cronus, a planet which was unlucky enough to become a battlefield for 7 factions. Orc hordes of Warbus Gorgets, hero of the previous game Winter Assault. Eldar from Craftworld Ulthwa, led by Seer Taldira, who also took part in Winter Assault. Expeditionary forces of the Young Tau Empire, led by Shazocase, the protagonist of the little popular first-person shooter Warhammer 40,000, Fire Warrior. An army of traitor space marines from the Order of the Word Bearers. Undead cohorts of Microns. The player can also control one of 2 factions of the Imperium. The 4th company of the Space Marines of the Blood Ravens, who became the hallmark of the Dawn of War series and the heroes of many memes of the Warhammer community. And the 1st Cronus Regiment of the Imperial Guard, which, according to the good old tradition of the universe, although they are fighting on the same side due to bureaucratic conflicts, are forced to grab each other's throats. After watching a brief introductory video explaining the motives and goals of the selected faction, the player finds himself in the global aspect of the game. Cronus is divided into several regions controlled by one or another faction. On his turn, the player tries to capture opponents' regions and defend their territories. All this continues until the enemy capitals fall, and there is no one left on the planet except us. On the side of computer opponents is the starting territorial advantage and health/damage handicaps set according to the difficulty chosen by the player. Yes, Dark Crusade is one of many games that create difficulty by playing with numbers. The player, in turn, can counter this with his unsurpassed tactical skill and the fact that all participants in this oppositions are hostile to each other. If you look at it this way and look into the past, Dark Crusade is the first battle royale in the RTS genre. If we put aside the global component, we are left with a classic real-time strategy in an unusual and attractive setting. Here, heavy automatic weapons coexist with two-handed axes, tanks are used to get within striking distance of the enemy, and angels, demons, and giant humanoid robots are as common as semi-intelligent aggressive talking mushrooms. The lack of a solid end-to-end plot had a positive impact on replayability. A region that was easily occupied during one playthrough can easily turn into an impregnable citadel in the next. Unfortunately, the game has an extremely limited number of tactical mechanics. Units receive less or more damage while on a certain landscape, but there are usually so few of these places on the maps, and the bonuses and debuffs are so insignificant that the player almost immediately stops noticing them. But the direct process of battle will undoubtedly attract the player's attention. This is by no means a chaotic reset of health bars with one death animation for everyone. The Dawn of War series in general and Dark Crusade in particular use the sync kill mechanic. Any confrontation in close combat can end with a spectacular finishing animation, which ranges from banal point-blank shooting to almost cinematic scenes that take more than 1 second. And given the fact that almost every unit in the game is represented by a squad consisting of several units, there is always something to see. Additionally, with a solid board game lore base behind it, Dark Crusade boasts an extensive stack of units for every playable faction. They may seem illogical, strange, and pretentious, but they are certainly not boring. The squad mechanics of the game guarantee a leisurely confrontation compared to other RTS, practically guaranteeing that the player will have time to react to any change on the battlefield, which makes it quite friendly to newcomers despite the setting of a merciless ongoing war. The Lord of the Rings, the Battle for Middle-earth Aya. Just like Dark Crusade, Battle for Middle-earth is global purely nominally due to the presence of the War of the Ring mode. In it, the player can compete with computer opponents trying to establish control over as many regions of Middle-earth as possible. Some of them are relatively empty and contain only minor geographical references to films or books. Some house great fortresses like Minas Tirith or Helm's Deep. However, they are great only in words. Unfortunately, the series suffers from the typical nature of most games based on low-budget films. What if it doesn't work out? Intimacy and a thorough transfer of the visual part. Therefore, players should not expect anything beyond unique, both in terms of the local architecture and game design in general, which, however, does not negate the fact that the visuals presented in the game are quite acceptable even by today's standards. And just like Dawn of War in general, the Battle for Middle-earth uses squad mechanics of units, which means more troops on the battlefield, more colorful confrontation, and more difficult microcontrol. The roster of factions has been significantly expanded compared to the previous part. On the battlefield, you can now see separate formations of goblins, dwarves, and elves. Rohan and Gondor now share one faction, the Men of the West. In addition, the construction mechanics have changed. Now buildings can be erected anywhere on the map, as is the case in most routes, and not just in special places like in the first game in the series. However, I personally prefer the old original version. With the increase in the number of factions, tactical variability on the battlefield has also increased. Elves predictably bombard their enemies with arrows from incredible distances, dwarves boast multifunctional heavy chariots, and goblins instantly move troops from place to place using underground tunnels, just like the GAO fighters from Command and Conquer. However, no qualitative change occurred in the parties. The forces of light still protect the lives of their soldiers, having the opportunity to restore the thinned-out squad. The villains, on the contrary, didn't care about the partnership, and they will gladly send wounded animals to the slaughterhouse for a short-term gain in resources. In addition to the aforementioned War of the Ring, the second part is distinguished from the first by the possibility of creating your own, unique, and inimitable hero in addition to the already abundant list of book and cinematic protagonists. The player is free to associate him with a good or bad faction, initially making him, for example, an orc or an elf, or choose a neutral side and add to any of the parties to the conflict as desired. The hero architect itself is not very diverse, and the created hero can easily highlight the strengths of the chosen faction or try to compensate for its shortcomings, but in any case it will add a little variety to your adventures. Overall, the Battle for Middle-earth is a pretty successful game, definitely based on the movie, not the book, which is not a sin to play for a couple of evenings even in distant 2023, especially if you have a friend who loves retro games as well. Endless Legend. In my opinion, an extremely successful experiment by Amplitude Studios, which gave rise to something more than an imitator of the Civilization series. One of the main factors, what interested me personally, was the unusual semi-fantasy setting. The inhabitants of the planet Auriga, the main setting of the game, although they are at a stage of development that can conventionally be called medieval, are still aware that they are not the only inhabited world in the universe, and the backstories of the characters, descriptions of artifacts, and some quests and subsequent projects of the studio develop this design a move weaving, albeit not without flaws, different Amplitude Studios games into a single universe. The detachment of what is happening from the projects that dominate this genre, oriented towards the historical and everyday, also emphasizes the geometric design of the landscape, and of course the races inhabiting Auriga. Fans of any style of play will find followers for themselves. Here you can meet a nation of sadomasochistic sorcerers, convinced pacifist traders, or a swarm of cannibal insectoids that hate all living things, classical elves practicing unity with nature, and knights who have lost their human appearance, transformed into animated armor. In addition, each nation has its own unique style of architecture, unit design, and a rather fascinating story quest chain, which reveals your subjects from an unexpected side and will pleasantly complement the classic 4X gameplay. In addition, the ability to individually configure and customize not only each unit in the game, but also the races themselves, transforming the original templates into something original that suits your personal playstyle, raises replayability to an almost unattainable level. The battles in the game turn out to be controversial. I can't shake the impression that the developers were guided by the cinematic mechanics of Endless Space, where units are at least nominally subordinate to the player. Battles still take place more automatically. Endless Legend confrontations capture a piece of the landscape where troops were located before entering the combat phase. This can either play into your hands or make the fight almost unwinnable. After the troops are deployed, the battle itself begins, which the player must win in 6 moves, otherwise a draw is declared. At the beginning of each new action phase, the player gives orders to his players, and they try to follow them due to their artificially intelligent abilities. And it is this aspect of the orders that irritates me the most. Well, why should the developers choose an option with direct control like in Age of Wonders or Might and Magic? Sea battles are even worse. Indeed, in addition to the designated nominal control, players will have to control faceless ships identical to all factions, which of course can be customized and improved according to their roles. But in general, naval combat looks like an aspect created for the dominance of a single DLC faction. Speaking of DLC, there are many of them here. Unjustifiably a lot, which however, in our age of total profit, alas, is not uncommon. And they come out with annoying inconsistency in addition, often carrying with them radically game-changing mechanics created only for the player to buy a new edition with a faction that, in the new conditions, is like a duck to water. And this is a disease of almost every game from the studio. There is no certainty that in half a year you will find the game you love just as you remember it. And this is not half a year since release. I mean abstract 6 months. For example, the last addition to a game released in 2014 appeared in 2019. On the one hand, this is a credit to the developers for not forgetting their previous projects. On the other hand, it brings to mind thoughts of extortion and gives rise to an unbearable desire to finally play the finished game. However, I can't be angry with this game for a long time. It's very addictive with its originality, sound design, and the abundance of small factions that can be assimilated into your main nation and used as an additional specialized type of troops, if your original wards are not strong in something. Empire – Total War, without claiming the laurels of an eminent game analyst and game design expert. However, I believe that Empire at one time was no less, and maybe even more, revolutionary for the Total War series and full of new ideas than the transition to the fantasy setting of Warhammer. The first acquaintance with the game surprised me, in some places even discouraged me. In comparison with the previous, melee-oriented parts of the Empire series, it focused its attention on completely different aspects. And no wonder, because this is the enlightened 18th century, knightly traditions have sunk into oblivion, and firearms ruled the roost on the battlefields. The first thing that caught my eye was that when I selected a ranged squad, the radius of its destruction became visible, and the squad itself refused to open fire until all its members took their places in the formation. In addition, the pattern of behavior of shooters has undergone a radical reworking. In Medieval 2, a ranged squad that had been neglected by the player theoretically had a chance against an enemy approaching from an awkward angle, since each soldier in the formation chose when and in which direction to shoot. Compared to their more primitive brethren, Empire riflemen showed a fair amount of fatalism and completely ignored the enemy approaching from the flank unless he invaded the designated firing zone. And in my opinion, this is the right decision because, as in real life, every hit of a 27-gram bullet with an initial speed of 520 meters /sec threatened with inevitable death. If the shooters retained the ability to independently fire in any direction, the need for any other units would certainly disappear. In addition, the battlefield itself became more interactive. Troops learned to hide behind stone fences, take cover inside buildings, use artillery mounted on the walls of forts, and of course, storm these same walls from a swoop. Each infantry unit in Empire could use cats when storming enemy walls, which made sieges more dynamic and intense. This mechanic would be strangely reflected in later games in the series, when each squad storming an enemy city would have a pocket ladder with them. In addition, in ground battles, the defending side could erect simple fortifications such as earthen ramparts and sharpened stakes to protect against cavalry attacks. The non-combat aspects of the game have also undergone significant changes. The player has the opportunity to develop science by gradually modernizing his army, navy, and economy. In addition, some buildings important for the economy and science are now moved outside the city walls and are located in different parts of the city-controlled region, which certainly opens up new opportunities for putting pressure on the enemy, or on the contrary, creates problems for garrison units. Another cardinal one, and not fixed in the series, was the presence of institutions of power and their replacement. Government in Empire is not just a digital bonus to population happiness or production levels, it is a small gain within the game. The more power is concentrated in the hands of a player, the more effective his state apparatus is. fools, and incompetent lazy people can easily be removed from their positions and replaced with someone competent. However, ordinary people do not understand the obvious advantages of an absolute monarchy, and as technology develops, they begin to grumble and demand reforms. It's up to you to decide how to deal with this problem, whether to build more taverns and brothels, increase garrison forces, or perhaps give up some powers by transforming the country into a republic or constitutional monarchy. However, the higher the level of freedom, the more your cabinet suffers. Stupid people chosen by ordinary people come to important positions and you can't do anything about it. Maybe announce early elections, but rest assured, others will definitely replace the previous quitters. However, when I mention Empire Total War, the first thing I remember is not the new technology lines or the increased interactivity of ground battles, and not even behind-the-scenes political intrigues. I remember the sea. Neither before nor after, in strategy games or any other games, have I seen such beautiful sea battles using a sailing fleet. Swift sloops, clumsy liners, formidable frigates, and frightening battleships, there is a place for everyone in the vast expanses of the sea. And these are not insipid firefights where the ships that have taken up positions simply shower each other with shells. This is an elegant, deadly dance, which, however, can end in a very unexpected way if a successful shot hits the powder magazine. Undeservedly rarely mentioned in the Total War line of games, Empire is definitely worth your attention. Total War Warhammer 2. It's hard to try to be objective when describing this game. The fact is that I am a long-time and devoted fan of the Warhammer setting in all its manifestations. Even frankly weak games in this universe, such as Mark of Chaos, preemptively receive a couple of points from me simply for the fact that they take place in the worlds that I love. However, Warhammer 2 is by no means a simple numbered part of a profitable conveyor belt aimed at fans and about fans. This is a strong, although not without flaws, representative of its genre, but a project that does not live on the laurels of its previous parts alone. It is developing, adding many unusual and interesting mechanics, while not forgetting to pay attention to the wishes of the fan community. Maybe after some time the third part of the franchise will eclipse the glory of its predecessor. But so far, this has not happened. Warhammer 2 for me is the jewel in the crown of games based on the Games Workshop universe, the Total War series, and the obvious choice of what to play when all other games are boring. It sounds a little fanatical, but if you look at the facts, Warhammer 2 has everything to interest a fan of strategy games in general and the global strategy subgenre in particular. Let's start directly with the globality. The first part of Warhammer took the player to the so-called Old World, an impressive area geographically and politically reminiscent of Europe during the late Middle Ages. The most significant states of people are gathered here. Most of the strife, civil strife, fratricidal wars, border conflicts, and other bloody incidents take place here, filling the life of the average inhabitant of this world with meaning, and for some nations even being a state ideology. Warhammer 2 added to these rather large territories the New World, a fantasy variation of North and South America, as well as Ulthuan, the local analog of the mysterious Atlantis. The player is free to choose one of two global maps, or by choosing the Mortal Empires mode, combine both, doubling the size of the game world. In such a vast territory, the player will not be cramped both in a single game and in a multiplayer campaign. You can literally get tired of conquering new lands. And this is by no means a simple stretching of the game space. Each global region has its own unique plot-based geography, climate, and factional content. And such a vast space for exploration is literally overflowing with life. Dozens of large and small factions from almost every race described in the original lore can be encountered or taken under player control. And there is plenty to choose from. My personal favorites are the Skaven, a civilization of wise, technically gifted ratmen. And besides them, arrogant light, bloodthirsty dark, and dogmatic forest elves. A pair of necromancers with radically different views on the afterlife of the nation. Tribes of orcs and goblins, demons, pirates, and countless human kingdoms. In addition, each nation is led by several leaders, which allows you not only to choose a race to your liking, but also to choose a development strategy within your chosen civilization that is closest to you. And the leaders you rejected do not disappear anywhere. They exist separately on the global map, trying to create their own states in accordance with the parameters laid down in them. With a little diplomatic or military skill, The player can enlist their support and even assimilate the brother faction, replenishing their ranks with several powerful heroes and leaders at once. Let this sound like a banal cliché from the shopping on the sofa program. But that's not all. The developers had the foresight to open up their game to modifications, and there are many of them here. Looking for a special regiment of guards to adorn your front ranks? Take a look at the workshop. Someone has probably already added it. Are you surprised by the lack of obvious mechanics from a lore point of view in your chosen nation? There will probably be something in the workshop that meets your needs. Didn't find your favorite character among the available heroes? Well, you understand. New races, new troops, new mechanics. Truly, the creativity of the Warhammer community knows no limits. And by looking at the lists of the oldest and most popular mods, you may notice that they have become part of official updates. Of course, the developers also pursue their own selfish interest by shifting part of the development onto the shoulders of enthusiastic modders. But what difference does it make if in the end we get a diversified, technically stable game that meets the majority of fan requests? Of course, no one is perfect in Warhammer 2 lacks decent siege mechanics. The warriors forgot how to change formations. A health bar has appeared that irritates some players and marks the status of each unit, whereas previously you had to carefully monitor the number of your troops. The game does not allow you to set different tax thresholds for different provinces. And despite the presence of several pirate factions, it does not have the mechanics of sea battles. And these are just the most obvious flaws that come to mind. However, as I noted earlier, Total War Warhammer 2 is definitely a game worth playing. Total War Shogun 2. Given the trend of Total War games, for me Shogun 2 will most likely remain the best realistic game in the series. However, it is not without some contradictory and unsuccessful design decisions, but they are so elegantly and harmoniously intertwined with its advantages that the result is Shogun 2. Judge for yourself. The game changed its focus from half the globe, or at least the European region, to the relatively small Japanese islands. But on the other hand, the strategic map is scaled and divided so carefully that you hardly notice the changes. The player still has vast lands to conquer, and the presence of several isolated islands provides additional advantages, or on the contrary, poses awkward questions for the ambitious conqueror. Naval battles lost their beauty and scale because the Japanese fleet of those times could not boast of outstanding characteristics or technical diversity. However, the presence of land nearby in almost every battle opens up new, albeit few, tactical opportunities. In addition, the ability to purposefully set fire to enemy ships and the boarding-oriented nature of naval battles add dynamics to confrontations on the water. The artificial intelligence doesn't try too hard to select troops according to the pros and cons of its faction. Most battles turn into confrontations with almost identical stacks of troops under different flags. But the battles themselves are so beautiful. The infantrymen's fights turned into individual duels to the death. Most likely this is an individual quibble, but I miss short videos celebrating the success or failure of the player's secret agents. In Shogun 2, we will only be able to directly observe the misadventures of ninjas and geishas under our leadership, but it's still better than the emotionless text summaries that will replace them in future games in the series. The only aspect of the game that I really want to criticize is diplomacy, along with the victory conditions. For local computer opponents, honor and conscience are just empty words. They violate established agreements whenever they feel like it. They betray not only you, but also each other, guided by. It seems that they are not guided by anything. Even a dynastic marriage will not protect you from a stab in the back, which, however, may not follow. As a rule, controversial diplomatic decisions are the prerogative of the Civilization series, but from my own experience, I can see that compared to Shogun 2, their policies are the height of reasonableness. In addition, even if you enlist the support of some house that devoutly respects treaties, you still will not see dominion over the country. For some strange reason, the control of territories necessary for victory in the company that does not take into account the lands of your allies. Therefore, you will have to choose your friends very carefully, putting a spoke in their wheels on occasion and limiting friendly expansion in every possible way, or immediately set a course for the total destruction of all opponents. But even with such a significant drawback, which reduces all diplomatic scrapes to a banal massacre, Shogun 2 can give interested players many pleasant hours or even days. After all, Unlike AI, you can experiment with types of troops, select the optimal army compositions for each task and for each of your commanders. And oddly enough, there is plenty to choose from. Although most units in the game appear under any banner, each of the great houses is capable of surprising opponents by fielding one or two unique types of troops on the battlefield. Of course, they will not bring you automatic victory, but they can not only directly strengthen your ranks, but even serve as the starting point for a bold and unexpected strategy. Sid Meier's Civilization. I think there are few people who have never played any part of this titanic franchise. I remember the times when the highest reward for me was not the realization that his civilization had won the planetary space race, but the opportunity to add another wing to his palace. But times are changing. Unlike FIFA, the Civilization series is marking time much less, and the sixth part of the franchise is actually quite successful in the field of innovation. In addition to the noticeably prettier, albeit slightly cartoonish, surroundings, new and old players will find urban area mechanics, invented from scratch or taken from games like Endless Legend or Warlock. This innovation somewhat revitalized the town planning aspect. Governors will now be able to help manage the newly built cities. Unfortunately, with their presence they can only make 7 cities of your civilization happy, but each of them provides the entrusted settlement with significant bonuses in accordance with its specialization. The logistics spectrum of the game also could not avoid changes. Workers, once sentenced to centuries of continuous work, are now able to upgrade only 3 to 5 cells, after which they will have to hire new ones, but modernization occurs instantly. Since few cities are located at a distance of 3 to 5 cells from each other, workers were also freed from the need to build roads. Now, this honorable responsibility lies with trading units. Although military confrontations, in my opinion, have always been not the strongest side of the series, in Part 6, they decided to revive them somewhat, returning the ability to assemble their own units in the army, and in order to use the updated troops, they added the causes of war mechanic. Now, the player's militaristic predilections can be denounced with beautiful words like War of the Golden Age or Revanchist War, which not only gives some bonuses to the attacking side, but also sounds more noble. The most interesting innovations, in my opinion, were natural disasters and climate change. The shadow of the idea of interacting with the planet was already in the air in Civilization Beyond the Earth, although in the 6th part, the player will not have to face a wave of aggressive Xenos fauna. The main enemy will be the melting of polar ice, leading to the gradual flooding of inhabited areas. Unexpected natural disasters can also add fuel to the fire, for which, however, you can prepare to some extent. If we summarize my personal and deeply subjective gaming experience, then Civilization VI, despite all its undoubtedly significant, changes looks and plays like Civilization. And this is good. Experiments certainly move franchises forward, but their abundance usually kills these same franchises. I am pleased to know that after so many years and millions of variations of the island map, I can still plunge into a somewhat updated but such a native world where Gandhi is still trying to destroy all life. Barbarians steal settlers at the most inopportune moment, and every civilization hates the player and does not get tired. Remind him of this. Write in the comments which game do you like more, and what selection of games to make next time.